Welcome everyone. And let's see here. My name is Annie Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of Troost ILead. And I wanted to just briefly introduce ILead and also briefly introduce this Career Talk series for anyone who may be joining us for the first time. So Troost ILead is an institute for engineering leadership development, and we really support the personal, interpersonal, and professional development of all engineers. We do this through a number of courses. We do this through a broad range of co-curricular programs. And we really believe that leadership and leadership development is something that everyone can participate in, and that it makes you a better engineer to develop yourself as a leader. Just a reminder to mute yourself if you've just arrived. Thank you very much. I also wanted to briefly introduce this program. So this is a program that we just started this summer. It's been a great program. We'll be continuing it through the fall, so please be on the lookout for future career talks. This program has a number of goals. So the first goal is to give you a sense, as you are all thinking about your future career, you know, what's it like to be an engineer in this vast variety of pathways that engineers tend to go down. So the goal here is to kind of look under the hood, you know, and in this case, like, what's it like being an engineer, someone with an engineering education who has found themselves in the healthcare and medical field? Like, what is that like? So the purpose here is to give you some exposure to what that might look like in various fields, and also to give you a chance to reflect on your own journey, where you see yourself going, and help you to get clear on the kinds of places where you can imagine yourself in the future. And then finally, the third goal is to offer some community building. We know that this is a time when a lot of people are experiencing quite a lot of isolation. A lot of you are home and don't see a lot of people. So we want to create those opportunities for you to connect with your peers and have some conversations. Those are really the goals of this session and these sessions. Okay, so a little bit of instruction, if this is useful to you, about setting up your view. There will be some times where there's slides, and if you want to be able to see the slides and also the speaker, we would suggest the side-by-side view. So a little bit of setup here, if that is helpful. Okay. And then some event norms. So just a few requests here. We want to ask that everybody please leave your microphone on mute during the panel, so that we can hear the panelists clearly. Let everyone know that the session will be recorded, and that's so that other students can benefit from it at another time. So if you're uncomfortable,
Annie, sorry, you seem to be cutting in and out just a little bit there.
Oh, okay. Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Oh dear. Okay. Milan, let me know if that continues, okay?
Sure thing. Seems okay for now.
Okay, excellent. So another thing, there will be time for Q&A at the end of our session today, and we really want to encourage you to put your questions in the chat. And another thing that would be super helpful is if your question is addressed to all the panelists, you can indicate that. If you have a question for a specific panelist, you can also indicate that with your question. That would be really helpful. Okay. So we tend to begin our events with a land acknowledgement. And I want to just say that during this period of this global pandemic, but long before that too, there was an acknowledgement and a recognition that systemic inequality exists, and that, and in particular, we're thinking about systemic inequality and injustice as it relates to race. And I wanted to read this land acknowledgement, but then also talk about how it is that systems and processes and policies can limit access to housing, to education, and even to good healthcare. So as we're talking about healthcare, all of these careers, you know, there's social implications for every career field, and we wanted to just name that as we launch into this conversation today. So I'd like to read this land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. Milan is going to put a link in the chat called Native Land, and it's a really interesting link where you can hover over wherever you are if you are in North America and learn about the Indigenous history of the area that you are living in or working on at the moment. So I really encourage you to check out and lean into that learning about our Indigenous history. Okay. So moving into our session today, this is how it's going to look. In a moment, I will be introducing our panelists. We'll have an opportunity for some panel discussion. Then we will have a short breakout group. We'll have another opportunity for some more panel discussion. We'll have another breakout group, and then we'll have an opportunity to hear questions from you. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and you'll be able to see some faces a little bit better. I want to take a moment and introduce our panelists to you, and they will then say hello and let you know where they're calling in from this morning or this afternoon. Okay, I'm going to start with Amir Allana, and Amir Allana is a paramedic and a fellow with the McNally Project for Paramedicine Research. He is pursuing a master's degree at the Institute for Health Policy Management and Evaluation here at the University of Toronto, where he does research on the evolving role of paramedics in extending primary care and social service to patients in the community, so beyond the traditional role in emergency medicine. Prior to being a paramedic, Amir worked for 2 years as a public planner in the energy sector and 2 years in Uganda in international development. And during his time as an engineering science 1T2 student, he was president of the U of T EWB chapter and was very involved with Trust ILead. So welcome, Amir. Where are you calling us from?
Hi, everyone. I'm calling in from Toronto.
Okay.
Good to be here.
So happy to have you here. Thank you. Okay. Sanjay Malaviya is our next panelist, and Sanjay founded RL Solutions, a Toronto-based patient safety software company in 1997. He served as president and CEO until 2019. During his tenure, he transformed RL Solutions from a one-product company born out of a hospital IT department to a leading provider of risk management, patient feedback, claims management, and infection surveillance software to over 2,000 healthcare organizations around the world. Sanjay is a graduate of the University of Waterloo and has leveraged his degree in computer engineering, as well as over a decade of experience in a hospital setting, to offer a truly unique perspective on healthcare IT. His leadership resulted in RL Solutions being named one of the best employers in Canada for many years running. And Sanjay has been an active member of the Trust ILead board. So welcome, Sanjay. So happy you're here. We'd love to hear your voice and hear where you're calling in from.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. And I'm calling in from Toronto. And I just thought I'd apologize for being from Waterloo.
Forgiven, forgiven. Okay. And last but certainly not least, Sabrina Tang. Sabrina Tang is an incoming family medicine resident at the University of Toronto. Sabrina is passionate about technology and systems innovation to improve humanity in healthcare. She sits on the Canadian Medical Association's Jewel Innovation Council and is a consultant for Empower Health. Sabrina has been a social innovation fellow at the Mars Discovery District, a policy analyst at Ontario's Ministry of Health, operations consultant for academic hospitals in Boston, and a user experience designer at Improvata. I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly. Sabrina holds an MD from Dalhousie University, as well as a Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Engineering and a Master's in Health Science and Clinical Engineering from the University of Toronto. So quite amazing to hear about these panelists. Sabrina, I'd love to have you say hello and let us know where you're calling in from.
Hi, everyone, and I'm calling in from Toronto.
Okay, fantastic. So welcome. We're gonna dive in here. And my first question is for Sanjay and then for Amir. And that question is, I'm sure there are lots of students listening asking this question. How did you go from an engineering degree to a career in the medical field? How did that happen? What was the process? And Sanjay, I would love to start with you.
Oh, that's great. And you almost really told the story in the intro. But when I was at Waterloo in the co-op program, and I took a job at St. Mike's actually in Toronto, and started building software for their IT department. And one of the products, or I guess software programs that I wrote, ended up founding our company. And one thing led to another. And honestly, it's been a whirlwind and one of the best experiences. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel talks just to describe how rewarding it's been, and hopefully inspire some of you guys to contribute to healthcare. It's thirsting for engineering talent.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Amir, how did you go from an engineering degree to a career in healthcare?
Sure. Just confirming you can all hear me, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So for myself, I think even during my degree, I had a lot of I think misconceptions about what engineering was. And to be completely honest with myself, I kind of realized halfway through that maybe it wasn't for me, maybe. Still really loving the content and the science, but I felt fear and shame about the idea of dropping out. So I ended up finishing the degree. And then after I left engineering, I spent a number of years bouncing around, as the bio tells you, to almost kind of figure out what can I make of it, essentially, in a way that aligns with my values. So we'll go into it a little bit more further on in the discussion, but really for me, it was like three broad things that needed to come together to lead me to medicine, and really paramedicine. One is, what are my values and interests? And it was in kind of working on issues of poverty, social inequality, and healthcare. Those are the three kind of rough areas that I was interested in. What are the functional roles I wanted to perform, both now and in the future? So right now I wanted to be on the front lines doing human service work. And then in the future, I wanted to be working a little bit more on the higher level system side of these problems. So can I do both those things as an engineer? Like, I found that I couldn't, like that I needed to make that change. And then third piece that influenced where I ended up was kind of what are the realities of work in my life? What role does work play in my life? And for some people, it plays a huge role. And for me, like, there was a balance there to just for my own mental health. So it was about saying, no, I'm not going to take on a massive amount of debt and try to go to med school. Like, those are the types of things that I was considering. And between those three, I think, factors, I ended up here.
Okay. Thank you. I really appreciate your honesty and getting to hear a little bit about that process. I'm sure there are people on the call who ask themselves often, am I in the right degree program? Do I love this? Is it going to feed me? And it sounds like you've done a lot of soul searching to kind of carve out a path that feels authentic to you, that's connected to what you most deeply value, that is balanced in ways that support you. It's powerful, and good for you for staying with the journey to find something that is going to make you happy. I think that's one of the most important pieces when we're finding our career. What brings together our values and our talents and is meaningful to us. So thank you, Amir. Okay, so Sabrina, I'm going to turn to you now, and I'm wondering, when you think about your career and your work in healthcare, what's that thing that really sort of drives you, like the impact that you want to have? If you really drill down to the heart of it, what's the impact that you're hoping to have through your work?
For sure. I want to just sort of link some of the stuff that was said before to what I'm kind of going to say next. And I think when I think about my career, there was a lot of bouncing around, like from government to, healthcare and engineering. And I think we're also at a time in this pandemic where you're very likely potentially going to get a job that isn't directly what you trained in. And so when I think about the impact that I want to have, it's, each of those experiences was really valuable. You learn something different in each of those settings, and it's bringing that to whatever I'm doing next. So right now in healthcare, I actually find the system is very broken. I think, at least in the healthcare field, we talk a lot about how we actually have a sick healthcare system. We don't actually think about promoting health per se. We're kind of more reactive in a system. And so I think, and that's one of the reasons why I'd like to focus more on, like, how can we make the system, more, patient oriented and more about the humanity of it? Because right now I think it's really easy for patients to get lost in the system. My parents were going through some things, and, even I had difficulty helping them navigate through it sometimes. So I can only imagine how difficult it is for others. And as we think about a lot of the new technologies, there's different ways that engineers can design these technologies, and and are those the outcomes that we want? And I think it's up to us to collaborate with engineers, health professionals, designers, ethicists, to say, how can we build a system that actually reflects the values that we want in our society and actually helps people be healthy. And then in terms of how that looks like in the future, I think it's really common in medicine to have sort of portfolio careers. So being able to combine engineering and medicine with even like, say, teaching and education. So I'm hopeful in like the long run to sort of do a mix of things.
Okay, great. Lots of robustness there that we could dig into. Thank you, Sabrina. And Amir, I'm going to come to you with that same question. If you were really to drill down to the heart of it, what's the impact that you are hoping to make?
I can't agree with Sabrina more, both on the side of the experiences I had leading up to this all kind of build on each other, and that the healthcare system needs a lot more humanity. And for myself, first of all, the way I think about impact is contributing to a process of change in a system, as opposed to being the sole champion or anything. I think there's this kind of almost like hero mentality that North America tends to push on you a little bit, where like you have the one person going and changing things. That's how the movies work, right? But no, in reality, it's about figuring out, okay, what are the kind of strategic places that require a little bit more effort, and I'm willing to put in that effort. And for me, one of those places, and there's many out there, but for myself, I noticed that there's this field of paramedicine where it's understudied, it's quickly evolving, it's very frontline, it's always dealing with populations that I care about, in particular for my career. So things like people who are either underhoused or are living in poverty, with mental health, addiction. Those are some of the things, and there's a lot more. We're in community housing buildings a lot, where there's a whole bunch of issues that come up in terms of people's social needs. So I knew that about it. And I also knew that there's less than 60 paramedic researchers in this country, let alone this province. There's very few people who are pushing that field forward, but it's the appetite is there. The policy impetus is there. There's new fields like community paramedicine that are popping up, where paramedics are providing a lot of home care in collaboration with nurse practitioners. And so that stuff is happening because we have the resources. We're mobile in the community, but there is space there to push it, because it's not being pushed fast enough, and there's not enough people doing it. So for me, that was part of why I went this direction, is that my hope is to have more social care available in the community to people that's not just clinical, not just hospital based, where people have the time to spend with you, and are a little bit more connected to the types of resources you might need.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amir. It makes me very hopeful that you are in healthcare doing the work that you're doing. Thank you. And I want to come back to you, Sabrina, for another question. And that is, what have you learned from your patients and from the people that you serve, and how have you grown?
For sure. I think that, I've come from a really privileged background, and I think maybe a lot of us at U of T have. And I think especially in this pandemic, it's been interesting coming back to practice now that things have been kind of more in full swing. And I think we're seeing some of the impacts of that. For example, there's been increasing substance use. There's increasing like suicidal ideation, and not just, adults and seniors, for example, but actually like very young children. And I mean, as you kind of mentioned at the beginning of this session, there's been a lot of increasing isolation, especially with seniors who are living alone and are maybe just like kind of teetering on the edge. And so this pandemic, while is really exacerbating something that was already happening. And so I feel like from my patients, I'm learning a lot about, what are sort of some of the layers of the stories that a lot of times, like, they maybe don't feel comfortable sharing in public. And I think it's really important, like, as we're kind of going through this really challenging time with everyone, to just keep in mind that people might be just going through unbelievable things. their personal lives. And, if something just doesn't, go the way you think it will, and I think even after this pandemic, it's helpful to keep in mind that, people go through a lot of things, whether it be like, abuse or a murder of a family member or just leaving housing, and it impacts like all income ranges. Yeah. But also the other thing is that I think this pandemic, just because the timing was so distinct, as I'm talking to my patients, a lot of people are like, oh, and this symptom started in March or April. And I think that there's sort of the obvious ones, such as like substance use or like mental health, but I've seen like random skin changes, like abdominal pain that's kind of difficult to explain. And I don't have like scientific evidence that it's caused by the stress of this pandemic, but I think it's just interesting that a lot of it started around the time of this lockdown. And so I think stress impacts us in so many ways. And at the same time, I think it's so important to realize that humans are generally also very resilient. And so it's incredible to see, prior to this pandemic, some of the things that people had gone through and that had lived through and are surviving with and are successful with as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like seeing so much and recognizing the challenges that so many people are facing. Thank you, Sabrina. So we're already a little bit short on time, but I just want to squeeze one more question in, and then we're going to do a really quick breakout. And that question is for Sanjay and then for Amir. I'm going to challenge you. This is going to be challenging because it's a big question, challenging you to kind of keep it to a pretty brief answer. And we might be able to pick it up again later. But I'm curious, as engineers work in so many kinds of multidisciplinary teams, and I even hear all of you, working in healthcare settings and working with healthcare providers, working with a lot of different people with a lot of different expertise. The question is, when working in multidisciplinary teams, and particularly when there's a hierarchy in place, how do you remember to listen to others if you're in kind of the higher level, and how do you advocate for yourself if you're in your perspective, if you're in a kind of lower hierarchy role? Curious your thoughts on that, Sanjay.
Hope I can do it quickly. But I think stories are always the best way to tell it. And so you guys know I was a co-op student and I worked at St. Mike's, and at that time computers were a very new thing. I think the gray hair tells you how old I am. So they were very new, and people were afraid of them. And so the CEO's computer stopped working and nobody knew how to fix it. And so they sent this, computer engineer from Waterloo up there, and literally all I had to do was blow out his mouse because all the dust had formed in the fall. And he hadn't used the computer in a couple of weeks because he thought it had broken. And I think, for me, it kind of showed me that no matter where you are in the organization, you have value to add, and you need to be aware of that at all times and be able to advocate for yourself, because it helps the team. It helps the entire organization when you're able to perform in that way. And it gives me that confidence that, I myself can add value no matter where I am, no matter what my title is. And so when I evolved and actually became CEO of my own company, I thought in my head that yes, I would keep that going, but I'm going to talk about this later. Like what you think in your head and how you actually behave are sometimes two different things. And so fast forward, one time we were in a marketing meeting and we were preparing for a conference, and our marketing team came to me and said, we need to give away Vespas, little scooters at the conference. And I thought, you guys are complete idiots, because these conservative, industry, this healthcare, you got, big people with suits coming in there and you're going to give away Vespas. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But some credit to me, I said, look, if you really want to do it, you can hang yourself and we'll see what happens, and I'll do what I told you so after. And it became the biggest hit in the conference. And 2-3 years later, we had multiple people copying us and trying to give away those Vespas. And it just looking at it from a different perspective and seeing that everyone has value to add, it was just another reminder to me that we always have to listen to everyone who's at the table.
Thanks, Sanjay. I'm sure you have so many stories about that, having been a CEO of a large opportunities to people. Thank you. I see that my internet connection is unstable again, but I hope that passes. So Amir, just briefly to you, same questions. How do you remember to listen to others or advocate for your perspective in multidisciplinary teams?
It's a big question. I'm not gonna do it justice. But I think some of the things that come to mind for myself, and what I'd add is advocate for my patients, because within the healthcare system, there tends to be a lot of conflicting processes and almost even things like the hospitals wanting to get people out the door quickly, and timing and bed flow, and for paramedicine, response times and performance indicators tend to cloud patient care a lot of the time. So I would add that in as kind of structures that you almost have to navigate and advocate within. And I think a lot of the big part of it is one, understanding those perspectives and not demonizing them. Like I can very easily demonize them and hate on some of the structures that are above me. I think they're nonsense, right? I do, but at the same time, appreciating where they came from, what the intent of them was, and how you can work with them. I think just having that little bit of respect does go a long way. And then the second piece is being clear about the why for yourself. So why am I doing this? Is it coming from a place of pride or ego? And if it is, like, we all have it, but just, almost checking it a little bit to say, like, if it's not coming from a place of just pure value, like let's lose this battle. I think being willing to do that. There's more to that, but I'm sure we'll get into it later on.
Great, Amir, thank you. Yeah, that self-honesty and that questioning of, where am I coming from? What's my intention here? And is my ego at play here? Or is there, just to be asking those questions as a professional, I think is really important. Thanks for acknowledging that. So Natalia, Milan, I'm going to make an executive decision. I think we're just going to do one breakout group today, just to kind of catch up on our time. But I'd like to move us back we're going to move into a breakout group. Let's see here if I can pull this up again. Move us forward here. So in this breakout group, you will have 5 minutes. You'll be in a group of either 3 or 4. And this is a chance to just kind of have a bit of a conversation about what you've heard so far. So please share your name and what have you heard so far that has inspired you or sparked your curiosity. From these conversations, you might even generate a question or two that you'd like to put in the chat for the Q&A period. So we hope you enjoy just getting a chance to connect with some of your peers. We'll see you back in 5.
Okay, here you go, everybody.
All right. Hello again. I hope you had a great conversation, and just really want to invite you to post any questions in the chat so that we can address some of those in our Q&A period. I also want to remind you to please mute yourself now that you're back from your breakout room. So please press mute so we don't have any sound interference. Okay. I hope you enjoyed that chance to connect with each other, and we're going to move right back into another section of this panel conversation. So this next question is for Sanjay, and the question is, we know that not everyone gets equal access to healthcare, and we've heard that theme come up even in some of the earlier responses. The question is, how do you work with your own blind spots and biases to ensure good care for everyone?
Wow, well, thanks for the easy question, Annie. This is a really tough one, and I think on the first thing is just maybe some acceptance and some awareness is probably step number 1. And it's when it's put in this context of this question, sometimes it seems like a bad thing, but I think we need to remember that when we stereotype or when we have reflexive thoughts, it's really a nice human thing. And some examples, fight or flight is a human reaction that we have, and it just happens without us thinking. And it's as an example of a good way that we actually use sort of biased thought. But if you want to get better as a person, you should go through how you react to things periodically and just make sure they fit your overall values. So the first thing is just being aware that we are human and we have a tendency to have natural biases. And sometimes, most of the time, hopefully they work, well and work for us, but there's a few occasions where they don't. And, in getting equal access to care is an example, but just in any corporate setting, we all have biases, whether it's towards gender or different orientations. In our company, we were very diverse, and being diverse was a great way to be aware of the challenges that different people face. So sometimes we're able to think they, are experiencing this, they are experiencing that. and you don't really have a good feel for what that experience is. It's only when you have, for example, someone in your family with that condition, or someone on your team or in your friendship circle that's going through something, that you develop true empathy and understanding for what they're going through. And so if you truly care about your community and you truly care about proper access to care for everyone, you need to get to know who the people in your community are, who the people in your team are. And that takes effort and time. I get asked a lot of times about diversity on our team and why that's so important. And sometimes I answer that we didn't go out to create it. Toronto is a multicultural city, and that's why we have diversity on our team. But I would also add that if we didn't have diversity on our team, that's one indicator that maybe we have some biased thought in the way we hire and in the way that we actually build our teams and the people that we like or don't like. And so actively trying to understand why that is and changing it is actually helpful for the team overall. So it's not always just about getting the next best person. It's really always should be about building the best team. And sometimes the best team requires different elements. And I think that's one way you can stay on top of your biases, is to keep challenging yourself, looking at some triggers that might point to your biases, whether it's yourself personally, which is what the question is, or on behalf of your team, or influencing the way you deliver care or in the way you deliver your services as a company. So these are, it's kind of, you start with awareness and then you get into just a real true commitment to challenging yourself every day. And so my story is I like telling stupid stories because I'm kind of a silly guy. But I have to admit I'm a terrible golfer, but every once in a while I convince myself I'm really good because I can swing, I can hit the ball. And there's a lot about what I do when I swing that's great, but there's a few things that are actually probably really bad. And if I really could just sit and focus on those and improve those, the overall swing would improve over time. And I think when we're looking at building a team, you might think you're great and you're doing wonderful things, but it's good to sort of cycle back and understand where those weaknesses of bias can come and creep in and root them out as you're going along. Basically, and the goal is to make your team better, to make your care delivery better. And that's something that we focused on as a company a lot. And we're unapologetic about it because we absolutely knew that it would build a better team. And because our clients were all healthcare clients, I worked a lot with hospitals that actually went through the same thing, because their goal was to deliver equal care and have access to care for everyone in their community. So we're very proud of them for those efforts, and we learned a lot from them.
Thanks, Sanjay. It's really inspiring, and just that really great encouragement to interrogate your bias, but also to really privilege the team over the individual and make sure that there's a lot of different representation of various perspectives, identities present to make the most robust team. So thank you for that. My next question is for Sabrina and then for Sanjay. And that is, looking to the future, I'm sure the students on this call will be very interested in this question. So looking to the future, what are the opportunities for engineers in this domain? What are the opportunities that you see that the students on this call would really love to hear about? So Sabrina.
Yeah, I'm realizing as I'm looking through the chat that I might have interpreted this question a little bit differently. I think that when it comes to technology, I'm not, like, I've seen engineers, design so many things, and I'm not worried about you building, the next technological advance. I kind of have a feeling, it will happen. There will be artificial intelligence, robotics, changes to the pandemic, such as chemical compounds. But I think some of the really unique elements that engineering brings is that you have a design lens, you understand the design process, and you also have a closer connection to sort of how, say, a company may operate outside of healthcare, and like a sense of, what are the budgets for making these things happen. And so when I think when you think about what are the opportunities in this domain from a skills standpoint, it would be, working with healthcare professionals to identify, say, the clinical opportunities. But from a skills standpoint, the unique thing that you would bring, in addition to the obvious like technical knowledge, is actually your understanding of the design process. And educating them on what is possible technologically and what is not. And then also being aware that, when you're designing technology, there's, what's the ideal from a technological standpoint, but also what's practical given the system we're in, and understanding, how can we adapt the technology for the context that it's in. Okay. But yeah, happy to talk about like more specific things if that fits to people. Okay, great. Thank you, Sabrina. And Sanjay, anything you want to add to that? Opportunities for engineers.
Sure. I mean, I'm a living example of how engineers can contribute. But you just have to look at what's happening right now, especially with the pandemic, and telemedicine is taking off. You have Fitbits and Apple Watches giving real-time medical information to caregivers, and then you got robotics going into the bloodstream. There's an unlimited potential for engineers to add a ton of value, and the more reliable those tools can be, the more they can be used by the communities and really make a big difference. So I think now's the time.
Okay, that's really exciting. Thank you. Okay, and our final question, and then we're going to move into some Q&A, is for you, Sabrina, and that is, actually, sorry, I'm skipping a question. Apologies. We have two questions here for Amir and for Sanjay, and then we'll be back to you, Sabrina. So the question is, what is a skill, and I'm going to challenge you to be a little brief here if possible. What is a skill that you've come to recognize as critical for your professional success, a skill that you would not have anticipated would be critical as an undergraduate student? So Amir.
So I think honestly, I've alluded to it already before, so I won't reiterate too much. But I think it's learning to strike the balance between when it is that you're advocating and pushing for something, and when it is that you're going to almost like play the game of the system. And to me, as an undergrad, being a more idealistic and advocacy type guy, like I feel like I was very quick to shoot things down that are perhaps broken or perhaps flawed, but it doesn't really help the cause if you're doing that all the time. And I still struggle with that. So I think, yeah, it's easy to be one or the other, right? Like as you're a student, like the systems around you are saying, oh, grades, professors, hiring processes, they want things done a certain way. It's easy to follow them. On the flip side, if you're trying to, in extracurriculars, advocate for something, it's easy to just, here, this is what I believe, and I'm just going to do that. But learning to do both simultaneously in the same context with the same people consistently over years is a lot harder. And I think that's been there continues to be a skill to work on.
Okay, thank you for that, Amir. And Sanjay.
Oh, just hi, Annie. Just really quick, I think I would just, for me, it's empathy, being able to really relate to not only the people you work with, but the people you serve, and help meet them where their needs are greatest has been probably the single biggest thing. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm great at it. I just think that it's served me well, and that obviously we can all get better at it. And it's been a real key to my success.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so coming back to you, Sabrina, for our final question before the Q&A, and that is, you've mentioned, that there's a lot of challenges in the healthcare system. You've mentioned it being a sick system, and you've mentioned it being a broken system, and there's lots of room for improvement here. Within our large publicly funded healthcare system, what are the areas of improvement that you see, and what are the kind of the hot button issues at the moment that students might benefit from being aware of?
For sure. And I think there's a lot of hot button issues such as the pandemic, the opioids, racism that have come up. But I think one of the ones that's not talked about a lot, probably because it requires a little bit more understanding of how we fund healthcare, is that we need a lot of innovations in how we actually fund sort of the new technologies that are coming out. So I'm not going to give a quick lesson on sort of how it's funded, but in essence, the issue is that what we currently do is unsustainable when it comes to adopting new technologies and trying to procure them. And Ontario, in particular, has had a lot of pilot projects, and a lot of ideas don't end up scaling. And part of it's because we don't have a way of incentivizing this adoption and identifying how it is that they can actually lead to patient outcomes. And so a lot of the new business models out there will need to figure out how to mix money from industry, consumers, and government so that we can actually have a healthcare system that can, adopt the technologies, and so that patients can actually benefit from them. And I'm happy to elaborate on sort of the funding mechanisms
Okay.
at another point.
That's a great insight. That's something that those of us who are not connected to the healthcare system maybe would not have much understanding of how that works. So thank you for raising that. I do want to move now into our Q&A period. So I just want to, I'm going to pass it over to Allana, and I just want to thank all of you for this rich conversation that we've been having. And I'm curious to hear from students, what are the questions, what's been landing? So Allana, I'll pass it to you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Annie. Turn on my video here. There's a question that came up earlier in the chat, and this is for all three of our panelists. So maybe just to give a bit of an order, the way I see it on the screen, maybe we'll start with Amir, then Sabrina, then Sanjay. For the panelists, what would you say is the best approach to introducing more technology, presumably into the industry, and changing kind of the level of technical education within the healthcare industry? So maybe we'll start with Amir there.
Sure. I honestly don't have a good answer for that question, so maybe my co-panelists will help me. I think one of the things that I've seen a little bit missing from the perspective of engineers, and I say this because my brother is an engineer who's trying to work in the medical field, is I think there's a good understanding of technology. There's perhaps a less good understanding of the culture of medicine amongst engineers, which influences the adoption of technology. So what are some of the priorities and the almost like informal ways that physicians operate, that nurses operate, that hospitals operate? It's that I think those are some of the biggest impediments. And if you can design your initiative to be more aware of that, and that requires a little bit of patience, perhaps some observation, and not one day of observation, we're talking a month of observation, and to really get to the sense of what the cultural elements are of these institutions and the professions, it will go a long way to helping you both educate medical professionals as well as design your initiative or technology.
Sabrina?
Okay, yeah. No, I very much agree with what Amir has said about, I think, having been through the shift of being more in engineering and then in healthcare, there's huge differences in culture. And I think that's why it's so important to collaborate and understand what are the clinical questions, what are the system incentives, and therefore what might inform the business models to actually get your technology adopted. Because otherwise it might just not be, framed the right way, and you might not be designing the right thing. And in terms of the second part of the question around changing the level of technical education, I think that one of the things to watch out for is that there's new streams within healthcare in terms of career opportunities that people are kind of putting themselves into. So one of the big ones would be quality improvement. So if you were, say, looking for someone who might be, maybe more open to helping you, say, navigate the system and how it might change, you might look for someone with like a quality improvement background. Similarly, I think one of the sort of roles that we're thinking more from our clinicians is like the idea of a clinician innovator. So ones that are more knowledgeable about the technological opportunities, and those might be people who are maybe easier to collaborate with because they have a bit of sense of both sides. But I definitely would encourage talking to as many people as possible, and including them as like part of the team or consulting them very frequently.
That's great.
And Sanjay?
Yeah, so just, well, we were part of this, but basically some of the tools that are used in healthcare, getting them introduced at an undergraduate level, so people who graduate into the field are actually already aware and are used to using them as soon as they graduate. That would be really helpful. As one thing. And then I think that it's happening already, but I remember when I was an engineer way back in the day, it was just engineering and that's it. Now you have engineering combined with, and you pick it, whether it's an MBA or something else. I'd like to see more hybrid programs that are linked to healthcare fields. So there's no reason why we can't have a hybrid program where you're going into a medical field, but you also have a minor or a side degree in engineering. And I hope that these kinds of things start to evolve as time goes on.
Great. A couple more questions have come up, so we'll try to do our best to get through as many as we can here with the time we have left. Perhaps we'll go in reverse order for this one. And this is a question for all three panelists again. What are some of the misconceptions that you held about healthcare during university that maybe changed once you entered the field? So we'll start with Sanjay here.
Well, definitely an easy one. Definitely, I think I'm aging myself a bit, but in the old days, we used to think that, you know, our physician, our healthcare people really knew everything. They're the be all and the end all. And as we got in, we realized it was a very hectic place, and a lot of people were scrambling to try to find answers. So I think over time, we've seen the consumer sort of take a more active role in their healthcare, and that's definitely a conception or perception of mine that changed as I got more involved in the field.
In terms of the misconceptions I had, I think that probably just the sort of the patient focus. While we talk a lot about patient-centeredness, and it does happen, like a lot of the times that a lot of system factors do get in the way, and there's just so many unintended consequences of when people try to put in, say, new systems to incentivize patient goals. And so I think the degree of complexity about how the incentives and the policies and the organizational structures interplay with then, therefore, the actual patient outcomes and the patient-centered care that we try to provide. I think I didn't really appreciate how much that did impact it before.
And I guess it's my turn. So I think for myself, I maybe naively thought that it was a common understanding that biological health is a very small but important part of health, and that all these social factors that we talk about, including income, housing, food security, to me, the connection was natural as an engineer, assistant thinker that was interested in social issues, that obviously those things impact health, both directly through things like stress and indirectly through just decision making and quality of life that lead to and access to care, of course, and et cetera, et cetera. I think when I entered the field, I was quite surprised and shocked that that's actually not the common way of thinking. It's getting more common over time with an emphasis on the social determinants of health, but currently, and the funding will speak to it all, like, is that we still value the like specialist surgical, like, you know, specialist care, hospital-based care, medical care. That's still way more valued in the field of health, even though only 4% of the population perhaps use that at any point in their life. Whereas primary care and broad-based initiatives that take care of people, including the most recent thing being with long-term care homes during the pandemic, people are now starting to realize that, oh, that's really important. Well, yes, it is important. And I didn't know that this wasn't so well understood in the field of healthcare. And obviously it's my own blind spot, but.
Thanks, Amir.
Great. Maybe this is a question for Amir again, just kind of based on the direction from the chat. So in healthcare, the focus is kind of very patient-specific care, whereas in engineering, the focus is in some ways to reach as many people as possible. So how do you balance designing tech that appeals to both kind of ends of that spectrum?
Maybe Sabrina wants to chime in as well, but I don't think that there's a clear answer to this. My field of research is in the area of, just because you have to have a theory behind what you're doing, in the area of integrated care. And one of the common phrases in integrated care is you can integrate all of the services for one patient population or some of the services for all patient populations. You can never really do both. So for example, for patients with congestive heart failure, you could potentially design an app and other, like, you know, a home weight scale and processes to monitor their health status over time. And it would really solidly case manage that patient population. But you probably couldn't do that, design an app plus a care process to provide general primary care to people. So it is about understanding what population you're working with and being okay with that. There's enough people that need all of it, that you don't need to reach everyone with everything at once. It's just about having a well-defined patient population and a well-defined problem.
Right.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the times we think about pathways in healthcare, but I also think that sometimes we forget the fact that a lot of patients also have comorbidities. And so I think there has to be balance in not just design tech that's very specific, but also design more technology that's flexible and I can just kind of bring the level up. And so I think you're seeing some of the new remote monitoring technologies incorporate many more measurements. And so now it's becoming more like technologically possible to do some of these things, whereas maybe before it also wasn't as easy.
Okay, so I'm going to come back and share my screen. And we just have a couple final things to say. I know we're hitting the end of our time here, unfortunately, because I know there are a lot more questions. Hold on one second here. Did want to thank our panelists for being with us today. And I also wanted to say to students that, you know, this is a huge topic, engineers who go into healthcare in the medical field, and we're very happy to put on more of these career talks where we can dive into specific dimensions within the healthcare sector. Something we'd love to hear is when we're thinking about the year ahead and the kinds of career talks that we are going to offer in the fall, we'd love, oh, it looks like I stopped sharing. Sorry, I'm just going to try to share this again. Okay, there we go. We'd love to hear the kinds of career sectors that you'd like to hear more about. So if there's something within healthcare you'd like to hear more about, please let us know. If there's something in the tech field, please let us know. Whatever kind of engineering career that you're thinking of that you'd like to hear more about, we do our best to bring people in to host these conversations. So please let us know what's of value to you. I really want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy days to be with us today. It's such a rich conversation. There was so much to it. I feel like we could have spent 2 hours talking about all of this. So thank you for your time. And finally, for those of you on the call, wanted to let you know about some upcoming things that you can put in your calendar. Suggest you check out the Troost ILead website where you'll see all of these things. But thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope to see you next time. All the best.